All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Mic'd in New Haven podcast. This is episode 102. If you have not checked out the
Wow.
previous episode 101, that was with retired NYPD Emergency Service Unit Officer Ken Winkler, Volume 2 of the miniseries The E-Men Inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit. We discuss Ken's entire 21-year career, but particularly those 15 years in ESU and his life-saving efforts on September 11th, 2001. When the South Tower collapsed, Ken was outside of the command post. He immediately hopped on the radio, warned other units to evacuate the North Tower, and save their lives. So that was a great interview. If you haven't checked it out, please go do so. So from the E-Men over back to the news side of this podcast with a great journalist who I'm happy to have on. My next guest has been a journalist for almost, if not over 30 years, featuring the likes of Newsweek, LA Weekly, the LA Times, Reason, the Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times. She's an author as well. Her book, most notably, she's penned 5 of them, To the Bridge, is a true story of motherhood and murder, and is available on Amazon. A frequent guest on various news channels as well, including my friend Bill Cannon's Police Off the Cuff podcast. Her channel, Paloma Media, has amassed over 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. I'm one of them, of course. It's a great channel, so go check it out if you haven't. And we're happy to welcome Nancy Rommelman aboard the Mic'd in New Haven podcast. Nancy, welcome. How are you?
Well, thank you. That is definitely the best introduction I've ever been given. So thank you for that. Very comprehensive. So thanks for having me.
No problem. Thank you for being here. So, I remember watching when you were on Bill's show a while ago, Real Crime Stories, and you mentioned you actually grew up in New York. So take me through your early childhood here.
Sure, I did. I was born in the West Village where my dad grew up. An Italian kid, very kind of working class Italian kid, and then he went into. He really was a smart kid, became a stockbroker, moved the family to Brooklyn Heights, which is a super nice little neighborhood. I was kind of a bad teenager. Let's not talk about that. And then
Allegedly.
yeah, and then you can read all about that actually also on Amazon, a little 20-page memoir called The Queens of Montague Street. And then I wound up doing some film stuff and kicking around, wound up in LA. And when I was pregnant with my daughter in 1989, I really wanted to be kind of home with her and not like having someone else watch her. Not that I could have afforded to have someone else watch her anyway, but I was already writing. I was sort of doing some writing, some fiction, a little bit of journalism, and just committed. And very quickly, I really became a journalist in like very late 1993, and very quickly kind of was able to support myself writing for a lot of different national and local LA publications, and I just never stopped. So I know it's a different climate today. There's not the same amount of opportunity, and I mean there's tons of opportunity. You can do whatever you want, but in terms of getting paid for it, it's different. You gotta figure out how to make your own money as opposed to just like making $2 a word for Vanity Fair. So I was lucky to be able to become successful and support myself and my family, and just never stopped. So yeah.
It's funny, at that time, there were some female writers, but it was largely a male-dominated field. We saw female television journalists doing really, really well. I mean, Connie Chung was a notable name. There was Katie Couric, Diane Sawyer. But as far as writers, there's plenty of them now, and that's a good thing in both sports, hard news, whatever you want to describe. So for you, were there any particular writers, female or male, that you would say inspired you?
Well, it's funny you say that because I actually never did get that sense, at least at Los Angeles at that time. There were plenty of female writers. I mean, it seemed kind of like even to me, but again, I guess it depends on what areas they are covering. I personally have never felt that I was not given opportunity because I was a gal. In fact, kind of the opposite. I think you sort of can make some opportunities maybe the dudes don't get because people kind of want to talk to you. I don't know. Who did I like at that time? I was, I think like many young women writers, I was very enamored with Joan Didion, who wasn't really doing the kind of journalism she'd done in the 70s and 80s, but still really was a kind of North Star for me. I always admired the people that were just going out there and doing what is called like shoe leather reporting, like going out into an environment and talking to the people, whether it was a politician or a guy down on his luck at an old single room occupancy hotel. I like those kind of journalists that go out and get the story as opposed to just analyzing the story. Note that I don't like people that do analysis, but there was a lot of opportunity for that then because you had tons of daily papers. They needed stories and they depended on you to go out and get the story, not just sort of like research stuff online and do a little interview. So yeah, I found, I don't know, I think it's pretty even, men and women, from in my experience. But that's interesting that you say that you don't. Maybe we're looking in different areas, or
Oh,
were.
it could be that. And I think now it's the same, me growing up a sports fan, like, it's only recently, that's probably why, that you
True.
see, yeah, more female sports writers who are doing a very good job. One of the lead beat, I think the lead beat reporter for the New York Mets, for example, at the Daily News is a woman by the name of Tisha Thozar. So, I guess it does depend on the area that you look. So that's a good observation that you brought up.
Sports for sure, though. You are absolutely correct. We did, because most sports we were writing were male dominated. I mean, you had some that weren't, ice skating and tennis and other things. But the big sports that we watched on Sundays, these were men, and they definitely were covered by men. But yes, in the past, I don't know, 15 years, I have a lot of friends, actually, female sports writers. Kirsten Fleming for the New York Post, and then
Right.
right? She's great, and a couple of people I know out in at Sports Illustrated or in Oregon. But yeah, it's interesting how there's achieved, and they're covering male sports. It's not like they're covering female sports, which is which good. It's cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. Nancy Rommelman's our guest here in the Mike Name podcast. This is episode 102. So where does the interest in true crime start? I mean, when you were growing up in New York, for example, that's when the mob was really active and the crime rate was particularly high. So the police blotter section was always pretty full. Was that what kickstarted it, or was it other stuff?
I have to say, I have dipped in, through my career. So my first feature, you said a reporter for 30 years. It will be in 2024, it will be 30 years. My first big feature was interviewing John Wayne Gacy, the serial killer. But it wasn't, and we can get into that, but it wasn't that I was like really curious about true crime per se. I was interested in stories. So, it was like, what would lure me into a story? And also, the opportunities that come your way for a story. So I really haven't, like, true crime has not been my beat. However, it seems like every 5 or 10 years, I fall into some like giant true crime story, whether it was Gacy or whether it was a story of a mother with Munchausen by proxy, which is when you kind of pretend someone is sick, usually a child, in order to get attention for yourself. And in this case, she wound up killing herself and her daughter. Or the book that I wrote, which was, a woman that threw her 2 young children for a bridge. I think I'm interested in these stories because they're often presented to the public and the reader in one way, right? This is a terrible person. This is an evil person, and we have to hate them, and they're on this side of the fence, and it's terrible. Which, in the case of someone like Gacy, is, a lot of that is pretty true. This is a very, very deeply violent man. Now, I can tell you, when you meet him in person, as I did on death row 3 weeks before he was executed for the killing of 33 young men and boys that we know of, there may have been more. He was absolutely, as I've written and said before, he was like about as threatening as your dry cleaner. He was like, "Hey, Nancy, how you doing? Hey, kids, can I get you something to eat?" He was like, you don't see what he's capable of. But in a lot of these cases, the story is more complex than, well, she's evil or she's crazy. Nothing comes out of the blue. Nothing comes out of the blue. And it was, it's kind of my job to go back and sort of put the pieces together to explain how these things happen. Now, there are some people that are not interested in that. They're like, well, forget about that person. I don't want to know what made her do what she did. But I kind of think we're better off knowing how these things happen than just like closing the door and saying, well, I can't deal with that. I'm fascinated. Maybe the reader will be too.
And it's a good point you brought up, because for my 100th episode, I had John Miller on, who is, of course, the NYPD deputy commissioner, former journalist for ABC, NBC.
Yep.
And this is a man that, as you remember, interviewed John Gotti and most notoriously Osama bin Laden. And he said that when he was working in, I think it was Fox, it was Fox, that he would walk into the newsroom, and at the top of it, and this would be on both sides of the door, there's 2 sides to every story. Which one did you get? And I thought about that. It's such a great quote because, I mean, you talk about those cases, often with the way it's presented, we just go to a quick judgment based on our own moral standards and what we're being told. But sometimes there's more to that. And, you know, granted, when you're sitting down with a mobster like Gotti or a terrorist like Bin Laden, do we agree with what they did with their lives? Of course not. But what makes them tick? And what made them decide to do the things that they did? Those are the questions that need to be answered. And to do that, I think is the most responsible form of journalism there is, as long as you toe the ethical line properly.
Sure, sure.
And I think that they did that, and obviously you did that, which we'll discuss later.
I mean, two things. Number one, I would say, you know, two sides to every story. There's probably, you know, an infinite number to any story, depending on how you look at it, right? We don't live in a binary world, though it makes people, it's easier for people to believe that we do. I think also, you know, I never met John Gotti, but, you know, I'm going to imagine that, you know, there were parts of him, you know, he was the dapper Don, right? He was probably like super friendly, or maybe you guys could talk about like, oh man, you like calamari. I like calamari too. You know, there are so many commonalities. I've said, you know, and we may get into this. I covered, and I'm still covering, you know, all of the protests and Antifa violence in Portland last year, and also in Minneapolis to a certain extent. And it's like, you want to look at people and say, that is a kind of person I have nothing in common with, but that's just not true. Okay. We all put on our pants one leg at a time. You know, if we're fortunate, we've had mothers and fathers. We all eat and drink and love and cry. And if you're able to talk to people and find some common ground, they will tell you more of that story. Even if they're lying to you, they're telling you their story. And be able to reach into it. Now, sometimes people call this humanizing, and people do not like you to humanize the people they do not like. You know, if you're on the right, do not humanize the people on the left. And if you're talking to a mother that killed her kid, I don't want to know anything about her. I don't want to know that she's a Christian like me. I don't want to know that. I need to paint her in a certain way. That's not how the world works. It's just not. So.
The first instance of that, growing up, I was a wrestling fan, big time. Not as much anymore. I grew out of it, but as a kid, I loved it. And one of my favorite wrestlers, because of his ability and the fact that he was so great at it, was Chris Benoit. And obviously, we all remembered. I don't know if you remember that particular.
I don't.
Well, it was a big thing in 2007, where in a steroid rage, he killed his wife and his son, and then he committed suicide.
God.
And that was June of 2007. And that really shed a spotlight on the entire industry, on steroids, on head trauma, because people were saying, well, how could he do that? I don't want to hear any humanizing about him, just what you were saying.
Right.
But upon digging deeper, I believe, to their credit, to give it where it's due, it was CNN that was able to expose and highlight the fact that when they examined Mr. Benoit's brain post-mortem, he had the brain of an 85-year-old dementia patient from all the head trauma, the chair shots, diving off of the top rope that he had suffered. And it shed a light on CTE, to where now there's a greater focus on it in that sport, in NFL, hockey, you know, and that wouldn't have happened if he would have just stopped the line and said, he's a murderer, and that's it. And he is. But there's a deeper, what brought him there, as you said earlier, it began somewhere, and they were able to uncover that. So, you know, I pivoting for a moment, the first byline in a publication, that's always huge for any journalist, to see your name there.
Oh man, tell me about it.
I was having that conversation with Mike Lupick of the New York Daily News. I mean, that first time, there's nothing like it. So for you to see your name there and the story that goes with it, to know others are reading that, take me through that moment, that feeling.
Well, I actually have to tell you that my actually very, very first byline was with this little magazine that's not around anymore, called Bikini Magazine. It was put out, same company that put out Ray Gun, kind of like Young Dude Magazine, band, skating, blah, 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 blah. And I got a little assignment. It was literally like 150 words. They're like, this was in 1993. They're like, go to this genital piercing store in Los Feliz, where I lived at the time, and just like see what it's about. I was like, all right. So I go, and I'm kind of like, I mean, it wasn't, you couldn't see anybody. Like, I wasn't seeing anybody getting anything done, but just talking to the owner, and this couple comes in, young guy and gal, and they were there to get their wedding rings. Okay. Well, you know, on their,
leave it at that.
Privates, exactly. And I said to the gal, I said, well, what are you going to do when people ask to see the rings? And she's like, oh, well, we'll show them. And it was at that minute, I was like, I never want to have another job. This is it. It was literally like an angel had come down and dropped that line at me. And I was like, this is it. I never want to do anything else but be feeling like what it was like to get a story, but that byline. So the Gacy story, which sorry, you froze a little. I don't know if you're seeing me unfrozen. Okay.
Hi. I can.
The Gacy story had originally written. Okay, great. I'd originally written for a magazine called Details, and then it wound up not going in Details, and I sold it to the LA Weekly. I was so green. I didn't know anything about futures. I mean, I wrote a good story, and people actually can go over to Amazon. It's because it was published pre-internet. A company came and bought it a couple of years ago. It's called Destination Gacy. It's up on Amazon for sale on your Kindle. But anyway, I worked with the editor, and then he said, you know, it's going to be out on Wednesday, and I didn't have the courage to ask if it would be a cover story. I should have known. It was 8,000 words. Of course it would have been. But I went to the newsstand on the corner of Hollywood and Cahuenga, and I got there at 7 o'clock in the morning and waited for the news truck to throw off the big bundle of papers, just like in a movie, right?
Yeah.
And there was my, God, I'm going to get all overcome here. There was my story on the cover. And it was a free paper, and I grabbed 3 of them, and I walked into this little alley right behind, and I literally screamed out loud. I was so, you know, Mike Lupit is right. It's an overwhelming feeling when you know, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And I got to tell you, I was sitting here with a friend of mine, my friend Matt Welch, who I'm building the Paloma Media with, and we were talking about a piece I wanted to pitch to the Wall Street Journal, and I said to him, I was like, you know, every time my name is, I've written for the Journal 25 times. Every time I see my byline in the Journal, I get excited. He looked at me like I'm an idiot, but I do. I am still thrilled to write for publications, new publications, and meet new editors. And I still love what I do. So maybe that's why I get to do it.
That's the key, though. You know, you never want to take it for granted, and to still have that enthusiasm. It's a great thing. As you said, if you still love what you do and you still get that feeling, that's what keeps it fresh.
Yeah, you want to keep chasing the next story. I'm doing one today, you know, I'm building a new media company. And just like, you know, one thing when we started this conversation, I was saying that, you know, there was a lot of opportunity, you know, in the early and mid 90s when I started, there were a million places to write for. They needed content. I lived in Los Angeles. Everybody wants things from Los Angeles. Well, that's, you know, sort of changed. However, of course, we have the interwebs where you can do anything you want if you have the enthusiasm. And, you know, you have to have some resources, but you got to figure out how to get those resources, and it's doable. I mean, look at all the people look at you, right? You're sitting here doing what you do because you want to. Nobody's telling you you have to do this. And it's I mean, it's a wonderful time. There's always so much doomsdaying around journalism, and we have to, you know, government support it. I'm like, no, just go out and do it. Just go out and figure out how to do it.
You know, people ask me, how do you do this show and whatnot? And I'm like, listen, if a dope like me can have a podcast, you can too. It's not rocket science. You'll figure it out, you know, because there's nothing special about it. But I just figured out how to use Zoom, and I'm like, voila, you know, there we go. And
there we go. I mean, you got to be willing also. I mean, we have fallen on our face so many times because, you know, like even now, before we started, my technology in the other room, I couldn't get it to work. Okay, you know what? So what? You know, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be, we're not on CNN at prime time right now. You know what?
Right.
It's okay. What people want is they want interesting content. They want you to be authentic. They want to trust what you're telling them, you know, have some fun with it, or move them in some way. So yeah, let's all make great content. It's super fun.
Hey, you just got to roll with the punches. Like, there'll be times that you'll be doing a show with another friend of yours and Bill Ken's, Yal Baltor, who's great. and you'll be tinkering around with the microphone and you'll just say midstream, okay, we're not going to use the microphones, we'll just use original audio. And, that's, again, that's the realism to it, to where, sometimes you see, I'm not begrudging it. It is what it is. The budgets are high, and so is the production. But when you see any channel, rather it be local news, you're in the city, so we watch the same channels, Channel 2, Channel 4, Channel 7, and or you see the network, televisions, the makeup's so well done, the lighting's on point, the microphones are top notch. And you must think that nothing ever goes wrong behind the scenes. But then, getting to know some of these individuals behind the scenes as I have, you see that it is like true gumshoe work to make sure everything's running on all cylinders. It's not easy.
It is always last minute. I do a news hit on Wednesday nights for the Joe Donlin show. They're in Chicago, but they bring me up to WPIX, which is always a thrill for me because I'm a New York City kid. And, wow, WPIX, that's what we watched cartoons on as a kid. But anyway, I mean, I'm standing there the other day and it's there and this isn't working. We don't have the dongle and it's this and the light. And it's just like, this is network 10. And it winds up looking great, but it is literally like you're down to, and it has nothing. It's technology. You're trying to, and come on, with COVID, usually you just walked into a studio.
Right.
All the lighting was set up. Now, I mean, look at everybody's set. Luckily I have an okay backdrop, but I mean, we've seen, we're just trying to make it work, guys. We're just trying to put out some good content for you.
Yeah, briefly, because you mentioned PIX and she's a friend of mine. She's an anchor there. Have you ever bumped into Tamsin Fidel?
I have not, but I literally go there like on Wednesday evenings at 7, and I'm just in the, I haven't, not yet.
Oh, yeah, maybe she's a great lady. I'm trying to get her back on the show hopefully soon. So let's get to that Gacy interview. I mean, much like I asked Miller in regards to Bin Laden, there's a process to get in touch first, and then there's the interview itself. So as far as the process of trying to set this up, take me through that first.
Okay, so the story of what happened was I lived in Hollywood. A friend of mine said, do you remember we went to this party at this guy Rick's house? I was like, yeah. She's like, well, he's a pen pal with John Wayne Gacy, and Gacy is set to be executed in it was like a couple of months hence. And he got on Gacy's visiting list and he wants to go visit Gacy, and he thought it would make an interesting story. And I'm like, I would agree with that. So I had never, I asked a friend of mine who at the time was like beauty editor at Glamour magazine. I'm like, what do I do with this? And she's like, oh, just write up a pitch and send it to my friend, editor-in-chief, Joe Dolce at Details. I'm like, what's a pitch? I mean, this is how green I was, okay? But I figured it out. This is back in the days of faxing, yay. And they bought it. And I did not, this is what's interesting. I didn't know how to tell the story, but somehow I did. We drove cross country to see Gacy, and we stopped in all these cities. And meanwhile, Rick was on the visitors list. So we were assured we were going to get in on like X day in April. So we had like 5 days to get there, and we stopped in different places. And as I've said before, I kind of took like the moral and emotional temperature of people, like the people at the strip club in Vegas, and then the people at, the students at the University of New Mexico, and then my late ex's Native American relatives in Oklahoma, like we the bar in Texas. Like I just wanted to try to see, like, we are the people that make a John Wayne Gacy with our attention, whether it's our hatred, whether it's our fascination, whether it's how we change laws, whether it's our sadness. So, and it was everybody had different opinions, from the one who's like, fry the guy, to this man is a human being. So it was very interesting to put the story together, and then to get to Menard, Illinois, where the prison is, and not be in. We were not allowed in. They wouldn't let us in because let me tell you, as someone who has interviewed a lot of police officers, like they're not all that interested in giving you what you want. Why should they? What's in it for them? Not saying I love cops. Don't get me wrong. But when you're trying to get into the justice system, there are a lot of mechanisms to keep you out, whether it's attorney-client privilege or no, you can't do this. So they kept us out, but we persisted. Nevertheless, she persisted, and we did get in, and we sat with him, and he was the first. I actually, at that time, I was, 29, 30 at the time. I did not know I did not really know the definition of a sociopath. You know, we think of sociopath and we think, blood, fangs dripping, evil. But as we've learned now, people that have these sort of sociopathic personalities can be extremely charming. They're con artists. They know how to appeal to you, to make you feel that you're very important, and to sort of like they're kind of amazing. I mean, it's terrifying, but amazing. And he was, and as I've said before, I literally, we would still be sitting and talking to Gacy if he had his way. Talking, just like ravenous to like eat everything of ours. And we were there for, I think, 5 hours, which is a long time when you're sitting, and we were just at a desk. Like there was no plexiglass, nothing, at a little desk in a little room. Rick next to me and Gacy. He was shackled, but drawing, and it was intense. I mean, people can read about it. It's up there for sale. It's about, I don't know, it's like 20 pages. Anyway, that's how I got to him, and then having to figure out, how to tell the story. But I guess I don't know that people are born for the profession that they go into. I don't know, but I definitely think people have like an aptitude. Kobe Bryant had an aptitude for basketball and then worked his butt off. As you know, he would be the first one there and the last one to leave. If I guess I had an aptitude for it because I was able to figure out how to create a narrative, and which is for me the most exciting thing of writing, is figuring out how to tell the story. How do you bring people into the story? How do you keep them into the story? So yeah, and then that's how I did it. I mean, you just get yourself to the place and then you do the work.
Absolutely. And we're talking with Nancy Rommelman here on the Bikini podcast. That, much like I asked Mr. Miller, you're sitting across from someone who is pure evil. I mean, and it's already out there what he's done. He's been convicted. He's awaiting execution. So as you're sitting, I mean, at this desk, not any kind of a separation going on, no plexiglass, as you said, he's right in front of you. Is journalistic curiosity going through your mind, or is it more so fear, or both?
Well, one of the things I wrote about in the article was the sort of anticipatory fear, and wondering whether that was, how much was I manufacturing that for my own purposes? How much of it had any sort of basis? I mean, he's in a maximum security prison, shackled. Nothing is going to happen to me. Rick did say to me at one point, he's like, I was afraid he was going to like pick up a pen and stab you in the eye with it. But that was not who Gacy was. Gacy was someone who, I mean, besides we're not going to go into what he did. He was very, 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 a level of cruelty that I don't think any of us can really approach, hopefully. But he was, I gotta say, you said pure evil. Evil is always an interesting concept. I actually used it yesterday. So we have a little Paloma Media podcast, and I was saying that journalists who scaremonger, like to keep a story fresh or for their own reasons, I find that to be evil. I really think it's the journalist's job to keep people calm. It is my job, let's say it's COVID, or let's say it's a terrible weather situation or whatever. I really think it's my job to go out, get the best data I can, be super calm about it, and like put it in a form that I give it to the reader, that it makes them feel like they have the tools that they need, right? So to be afraid of Gacy, there was a little bit of that because, for reasons that I get into in the article, I was afraid, which is absolutely irrational, but I had a 4-year-old at the time. And Gacy had sent this questionnaire before we could visit. I mean, think about this, Mike. Think about this. He sent us a questionnaire to fill out. Things like, my biggest fear is ... Now I know why he did that. Because sociopaths, they're sort of like fortune tellers or con artists. They try to or if you're getting your tarot cards read, let's say, you don't realize that they're getting little bits of information from you before they do your reading, like maybe where you grew up or your favorite food or whatever, so that then when they read you, they already know some details. So Gacy did that with us. And so there was part of me that was like, my greatest fear is if something happens to my daughter, of course, right? And then I'm like, oh my God, but I can't put that in the questionnaire, because if I do, then what if there's like this secret underground network of murderers, and there's one in LA that he contacts and he does something to my kid? I mean, this is irrational, but I wasn't completely rational. But in any case, I was not afraid when I was with Gacy, except for the understanding of what he was capable of. Not that it was going to happen to me, but that it was like inside he had this thing that you actually can't see. You can't see it. It's almost like you're looking at a doughy 50-year-old something guy who's as threatening as your dry cleaner, who's ordering us chicken McNuggets, who's being like super sweet, but inside what roils in him is this like horrible thing. That's frightening. Now that's frightening. Not that he would do it, but that it exists and that you can't see it. That I think is terrifying, isn't it?
No, of
That
course.
like literally the guy like that maybe works at my bodega. No, not they're so nice, but that people are capable of this and you can't see it. That is scary, but also fascinating. It keeps you writing.
Right. It's not like sitting across from Sammy the Bull Gravano, that is in his physical prime, was a very physically intimidating figure. You knew on top of that he was a murderer. So it's not like sitting across from someone like that. I hate to be repetitive, but I go back to somebody like Bin Laden, somebody who was extremely calculated. It's not like sitting across from someone like that who was hell-bent on waging war against governments that he didn't agree with and ordering attacks. So it's as you said, there's nothing intimidating about an individual like that. But to profile him, I guess when you were talking about the underground thing, that's the thing. I mean, the things that they've done make you feel that way, to where, to borrow an old line from Jane's Addiction, nothing's shocking. But then again, to actually profile him as so in depth, I have to ask, a little while after that interview, when he was executed by lethal injection, um, I imagine, obviously, having chatted with him, you felt something beyond, okay, well, that's the headline of the day. What did you feel when you heard that he'd been executed?
So Rick came over to my house. I lived in Los Angeles, and my daughter was not there. She was with her dad, and we watched the execution. Yeah, come on, honey, sit down. Let's have some Pop-Tarts and watch the execution. Not that it was filmed, but they were outside the jail, and obviously it was a big story. It's funny. I'll meet people now sometimes, and the Gacy thing comes up, and some people are like, "Who?" I'm like, "Wow," that he probably was the most prolific serial killer in the United States. But in any case, well, what happened was interesting. I can't remember exactly the time that he was set to get the injection, but let's say it was 9 p.m. Pacific time, where then they expected him to be dead in like 15 minutes. But he didn't die. He didn't die for something like 2.5 more hours, which was just nuts. You're like, wow, this guy really is larger than, he is this large, monstrous character. But what I wrote and what I still think now is like, sure, we killed him, but we didn't. He goes on. Here we are. We are
27 years later, right?
Talking about this. You and I may never have met had this story done. He continues to be part of the connective tissue and Americana. So, and why is that? Well, because we created him. Right. So we maintain our fascinations for certain reasons. Who knows? But yeah, he died, but he's not dead in a sense.
The legacy in its all its twisted forms lives on, and that's the I never really looked at it that way. So it's fascinating that you bring that aspect of it up, because I mean, the thing that really drives the point home, I'm like, this man really was a menace. In his last meal, he had a KFC bucket and Diet Pepsi. I'm like, for that alone, making light of his crimes, I'm like, for that alone, you deserve the gulag.
It's funny because I've written now, I remember being younger, my mother was extremely against the death penalty. I mean, she marched like every Wednesday in front of the Brooklyn courthouse for decades. She's very, very against. And I really had to struggle with how I felt about the death penalty, because you see these, these crimes, and I've, as I wrote in my book, To the Bridge, the blood wants revenge. There's a part of us that has this almost this need. But I did, even for someone like Gacy, I fell on the other side of the fence about the death penalty. I just don't see it as a solution to anything. Not that we're going to be talking about the politics of the death penalty, but
No.
I just I realize that it's expedient. We think it's going to make us feel better. I read an interesting book that I used in the bibliography of To the Bridge, The Curious Case of Dr. Witcher. I can't remember the exact name, but the woman was talking about how there was a public execution. Oh, I think it was in the 1800s. And, people are like out there, yeah, yay, we're going to hang whoever was being hung. And the minute she said, this is what she's saying, obviously none of us were there at the time. The minute it happened, everybody broke down in tears. You think it's going to make you feel better, but it doesn't. It doesn't.
Right. I remember that being the case with when Saddam Hussein was executed in 2007. Now, granted, he was a dictator, obviously, who had been responsible for numerous hideous crimes. But I wondered about the psychology. Okay, it's over. He's dead, but the damage has been done. He's already caused so much harm to so many people that you can't undo that. And let me just say before we continue, for those of you out there listening to this, if you ever have a bucket of fried chicken with a Diet Pepsi, you're a war criminal. So that being said, I got to ask you, the 90s in LA was such an interesting time because think about it. There was the Rodney King incident in the earlier part. There was the OJ trial in 94. And then the Rampart scandal in the latter half of the 90s involving the LAPD.
For all of it. Actually, I was holding a toddler during the LA riots. I actually just watched a documentary about that on the plane. I was in Portland, Oregon earlier in the week called LA 92. I was there for the OJ verdict. Actually, my daughter was in preschool at the time, and we got a note home, like when I picked her up, saying, seeing as that we expect that the verdict is going to come out tomorrow, we're advising that people stay home. Because everybody remembered what happened in 92. Yes. I mean, it was bad. And we kept our kids home. I mean, that was a very, God, when you're living there, it's normal and you're just like, it's the water you're swimming in. But when you think about it now, it's like, it's pretty nutty that that's just part of your day. You pick up your 4-year-old and then you go home and you're like, well, yeah, since the OJ verdict is coming out, we should keep them home. Yeah, that was a time I was already writing for the very good magazine at the time called Buzz Magazine. It was the city magazine, and there was constant OJ coverage. I mean, it was constant. It was everywhere, all the time, all day. And they ran one issue of Buzz with a glass of orange juice with an X through it, meaning like this issue is OJ free. I think it's probably the only issue that was OJ free. And then I was there for Rampart, and actually I wound up writing about Rampart because I spent 6 months just. See, I get to do the best stories, man. I wound up at this. There's a cop bar. I don't know if it's still a cop bar called the Shortstop, and it was in between downtown and Silver Lake. And I stopped in there one time with my sister-in-law. We were both looking kind of cute, little dresses, just to get a drink. I was a nightlife columnist at the time. Oh man, it's like all the big cops and ladies, you want to dance? And it was actually like a really kind of retro, interesting. And it was just a bar, right? And I thought it was an interesting place. And LAPD, and there's gun lockers in the back. So I said to my editor at the LA Weekly, I want to go hang out. I want to hang out at the Shortstop and just write about it. Just like take the temperature, talk to people, talk to the bartenders, talk to the cops. Well, I did. I spent 6 months, like not every day, but I met a lot of people, some of whom trusted me, some of whom threatened me. Cops don't like you around sometimes. But I was literally going to press, and Rampart hit. And my editor's like, go back and sit there and listen to what the cops are saying about this. And it wound up being the last little part of the article that you can go, I think it's called Us Versus Them, the Code of the Cop Bar. If you go to laweekly.com, you can find it. Not with the super cool pictures. They just have the copy. But I don't know why I started saying that. Something about, what was your question?
No, I'm fine. It's just it's you can the more the guest talks, the better it is. In that, I was just saying it was a very interesting time in
Yes.
during the 90s in LA, and of course there was the
Yes.
murder of the notorious Big in LA that some
Yes.
people suspect as a corrupt LAPD officers had some involvement in. So I mean that decade, it was just think about all the craziness. I'm convinced that these cities take turns. New York was a crazy place in the 70s and 80s. We were talking about
Yep.
earlier. The New York of Mean Streets, the New York of Taxi Driver.
Yep.
And then in the 90s, things calmed down in New
Yep.
York, and then all the craziness just went out west in the form
Yep.
of all these insane stories. So I will say this. I mean, we just passed 20 years on it. I believe you were still out on the West Coast for it. So when 9/11 hit, as a New Yorker who had grown up in the city and obviously grew up with the World Trade Center, take me through how the West Coast saw 9/11.
There's a saying that says, if you ask a New Yorker, are you an American or a New Yorker? They'll be like, I'm a New Yorker. I mean, I'm American. I love being American, but like you are New York forever. I was in Los Angeles, and my parents were in the city. My dad was in Brooklyn Heights, like literally across from, watching this stuff come down. How was it? It was saddening and confusing and angering. And I think we all, I had not really been paying attention to what had been going on with, Al Qaeda. Why would I, I just wasn't. And then all of a sudden we're trying to play catch up and trying to understand how we feel about this. I will say I was very unhappy to not be in New York at the time. Yeah, I felt like I should have been there. Like not because I wanted to, be part of what happened certainly not at ground zero, my God forbid, but I felt like I wanted to be there to take care of New York. Like that's where I should have been, to like just be part of making the city feel better. We couldn't travel. No, some people did. I mean, William Langesfusia, who was the editor, one of the big correspondents for Atlantic, the Atlantic at the time, he got himself there and he wrote a very good book about the unbuilding of the World Trade Centers, because you have to take it, you have to clean that up. I think like most Americans, we had to figure out how we felt now. We had to figure out if we hated certain people. And then we had to realize that we shouldn't really be hating whole groups of people, that's really stupid, that brings us where we got to that day, right? I haven't really written about it. I will say, if we can turn a corner a little bit on a slightly hopeful note.
Go right ahead.
I was at an exercise class on the morning of 9/11, the 20th anniversary, over on 8th Street and 6th Avenue. And I was looking out over 6th Avenue, and about 10 or 12 cop cars, not racing, but moving at speed up 6th, and some ambulances. And I was like, I didn't think something had happened, but what I thought was, look, it's the 20th anniversary of 9/11. You got to be prepared, right?
Right.
Everybody knows this. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to walk around and I'm going to talk to people and I'm going to see how they're feeling. This is what I do. Like I'm an on the ground reporter. So I went to Washington Square Park. It was on my way home, walking. I get to the park. It's a beautiful sunshiny day. It's 10 in the morning. The fountain's on, and there's a guy, Hare Krishna guy, actually playing piano really nicely. There's some young dudes. They're selling blunts and edibles. They're being super nice and flirty with me. There's some guy doing something. There's the skateboard kids. There was no memorialization at all. There were no people, no flowers, no prayers, no flags. And I thought, New York is healing, has healed. And I think that that's hopeful in a sense. And I think a lot of people that I've spoken to, and I podcasted about this last night on the Paloma Media, you can go over to YouTube and type in Paloma Media, you'll find our channel, talking about how I think a lot of people expected to see a real somberness and obviously there's sadness, come on, but a real somberness. But in fact, I think we are moving on as we have to. It doesn't mean you forget. Of course you don't forget. I knew 3 people that died that day. A lot of us do. Not that that means anything. I'm just an American like anybody else. You don't forget, but you have to be good to each other and like you be excellent to each other. And I think that that's what people were doing yesterday. And I found that to be really, I'm actually almost overcome now. Like I found that to be really great, that we could go forth and not just be, and obviously I'm not one of them. I didn't lose my husband or something like that, and people did, but it was an okay day.
For my listeners, if you're new or if you're familiar, somewhat familiar with the show, go and check out on my YouTube channel. There's several playlists, Tales from the Boom Room, profiles of the NYPD's bomb squad, features of the finest and the best of the bravest, interviews with the FDNY's elite. And you can check out my interviews with these gentlemen and women who responded down there and lost dear colleagues who raced into those buildings to save lives and did not come home that day. It's definitely something that you remain aware of, and it's been an honor to speak with those individuals and hear their stories about it. So I will move ahead, and I don't want to keep you too long. I really had a lot of fun talking with you. It feels like, it doesn't feel like an interview. It feels like just a conversation between friends, which I enjoy.
Talking.
So yeah, exactly. So, I guess staying on the theme of New York City before we get to your recent work,
Sure.
You came back, you were gone for a while, but you've come back. What prompted the decision to come back? And given the fact that you'd grown up in the city, was the transition, even though it's a different city now, obviously seamless, given the fact that you've been here before? Because although the city's changed, the vibe certainly has.
Well, I decided in 2017, I'd always thought, when I'm old, I'm going to go back to New York. I'm going to live in New York. And I'm like, you know what? You're pretty old. You just go back there now. And in 2017, I started to come back and I said to my husband, I want to start spending like 3 months in the city. Maybe I'll get a place. We can split our time and do some stuff. We were in Portland at the time. And one thing that happened, I landed in I think it was October or November, early November 2017. Again, my friend, my buddy Matt Welch is like, I want you to come on this radio show I do on Sirius. And so we did that. And while we were doing that, someone else was there and like said, can you come on my TV show? And then I waited and I met some other people and I wound up doing a radio show that night. And I was like, I need to be in New York. I am a media person. I love media. I want to get up in the morning and do it every day. And Portland has no media community. I had more connections literally in 12 hours in New York City than I'd had in 10 years in Portland. So I was like, you know what, I'm going. So I started to make the move. And then in the summer of 2019, I just moved and we sold our house in Portland last year, and my husband's sort of splitting his time in different places. And it's just coming back to New York has not only been seamless, it has been an absolute delight and joy. I love New York so much. Yes, we had COVID here. Guess what? They had COVID every place else too. Mm-hmm. I love it. Yeah, I'm not going anywhere.
No, it's I don't live too far from you. I'm in New Haven, Connecticut. That's where I've been based. Okay. So I could just hop on the Amtrak right down. I have family in the Bronx and Manhattan. And that's my thing as well. It's just that it's my favorite place to be. It's my favorite place to go and visit. And I haven't been in 2 years. I'll finally be heading down to see a friend of mine in October. So I greatly look forward to it, because you feel like, I was telling this to an NYPD buddy of mine, that there's everything for everyone. Just look at the cuisine. For example, I'm Hispanic, I'm Dominican. You want Spanish food? There it is. You want Italian food? There it is. You want Middle Eastern food? There it is. There's pockets in a city of 8 million people to where, as U2 once put it in a song called New York, we're all living in a stew, but you coexist.
Oh man. So my editor at Newsweek, she lives out in Sheepshead Bay. I go out to her house for dinner. Sometimes I get out, I don't hear English at all. I live in Chinatown. I walk down the street. I see 17 colors and hear 17 languages, and it is completely normal. I'll give you something that happened the other night. I was out at an event thrown by the Israeli consulate here, and there were a bunch of people, and some people were talking, and then I was leaving, and I was like, oh, a friend of mine is in town from Austin, Texas. Let me get in touch with him. Do you want to meet for dinner? Sure. He's midtown. I'm like, okay, maybe we'll go to this little Italian place, John's, in the East Village. And walking from where I walked about, 40 blocks. the streets were alive, and this kind of impromptu, spontaneous, and it's all going on. You literally just go right into the slipstream, and that is New York. And I mean, it makes sense to me. It makes sense to my brain and my body and my sensibility. Obviously, to some people it wouldn't. Just like if I, go to Montana and get out of a truck and I'm standing there looking at a big mountain, I'm like, oh, it's beautiful, but what do I do? I don't know what to do. New York, just if you can just get into that slipstream, it felt. I was like, this is what it is. This Friday night, it's beautiful. You do things spontaneously. Beautiful, beautiful.
A couple more things before we get to the concluding segment. So one, I mean, you have been very busy in the last year going to Portland, going to Minneapolis. And, as I'm sure you've heard the saying before, the truth is always somewhere in the middle, and you're right in the thick of it in these two places. So from your vantage point, because I know if I turn on the television, I'm going to hear one thing. That's why I really don't watch too much TV anymore. Or even, I'm subscribed to the New York Times because I like their sports coverage. I'm a big sports fan.
Yep.
But when I see these stories pop on my phone, I don't click on it because I kind of know, unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to get the whole scope of what I need to. And I want to come to my own conclusion, which is something you talk so frequently about on Twitter.
Bless you.
So,
Bless you. Exactly.
Take me through what the last year has been like there. And from your vantage point, what is the truth about what's gone on in those two cities?
Well, I will tell you, and I will not be verbatim because we're going to keep this PG rated here, but I was sitting at with two other very good journalists July 2020 in one guy's yard having dinner and drinks, and one of them said, Nancy, what the bleep is going on in Portland? Because we really didn't know. You're exactly right. You turn on the TV, you turn on Fox, and it's savages coming to your town, and you turn on CNN and everything's on fire, and they're like, there's nothing to see here. And you're like, what? So my other friend said, Nancy, you got to get out there. You got to go, because I had lived in Portland for 15 years. Okay. I knew the landscape. I knew the players in a sense in terms of what their politics were and, kind of youth movement there. And I just literally texted my editor the next morning at Reason Magazine at 8 a.m. and said, I want to go. She said, go. I wound up taking 5 or 6 trips out there and writing. If you go to reason.com and type in my name, there's about 20 Portland stories, as well as a whole bunch of other stuff I've written for them. So what is the real story out there? The real story is you have a fairly progressive mayor of an extremely progressive city council. You've got a young population that has been pretty cross and pretty cranky and pretty active about wanting things their way. Well, okay, but what is your way? Right now, so far, what we saw happen all last summer and into the spring was people that want to just bust stuff up. Okay. They want to set fires. They want to tear everything down. It's a small group of anarchists, basically, or anarchist adjacent. Some of them are just yahoos that are really getting a rise and gaining identity and getting, some sort of release or relief from tearing stuff down. Now, last summer, when they'd been inside from COVID, when the jobs were gone, when the schools were closed, when you could go outside and feel like you were fighting Trump and his goons in the federal building, I get it. Like, it was the only thing that you were allowed to do. The city was closed, but still, nothing has been built. And that has been my issue with the movement, which is like, you keep saying you're against all these things. You're against the cops. You're against, government. You're against your landlords. You're against all these things. Okay. What are you for? Okay. You're for racial justice. You're for certain kinds of equality. Great. What are you doing to achieve that? In addition to burning down the police union 30 times and throwing a big bucket of feces, which I saw, into the police station. Like, this is not working toward justice. This is incredibly juvenile. I posted something the other day, and someone on Twitter said, are there any adults in Portland? And I'm like, you kind of wouldn't think so. Now, having said that, most people in Portland are delightful, normal people that want to go about their day and their job and their kids and have dinner and, make things. But the city has allowed itself to sort of be hijacked by this smaller group that has some institutional support in the city council. I would like Portland to get to the next phase of wherever it's going. That would be, and they have some pretty serious problems. I mean, I got to tell you, the homeless situation and the tent stuff going on in Portland is. People have tried to tell me I had an Uber driver when I was there in late June on a story. And I was like, so tell me, you drive the city, you got to see a lot of like, what's up with the homeless? Because I see it everywhere. And he's like, he looked at me in the rear view. He's like, oh, well, if you mean more people camping, yeah, but that's not a problem. I'm like, okay, it is a problem. It's a problem.
You know, what you were mentioning earlier was kind of funny because I had another friend say something similar about since everything was closed, people were going stir crazy. And it's like, dude, you gonna hop on the PS4 party tonight? No, I think I'm gonna go launch a Molotov cocktail at 7.
Right.
I'll try to be back by 10.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, we did have that. And we had, unfortunately, getting back to how things were presented with the media, they were presented terribly on almost all sides. And we became such, I mean, I guess, look, Americans have always been polarized. And in one sense, God bless it, we were just such an incredible country and we're going to not agree on all these things. But, you really had so much polarization under Trump because he was a very, inflammatory character that loved to swat the hornet's nest and make people mad, and they just took the bait every time. And there were not a lot of voices coming out of Portland, which is where I was, where you could feel like they were giving you the straight story. And I really have done my best to do that. And people saw it, like they got it. They were like, oh, I think I can trust this gal here. Am I going to get everything right every time? No, but what is right? We just have to keep trying to talk to as many people. And I have, whether it's the cops or the kids or, I've just tried to give you a prismatic view of what's going on there.
And the thing for me is I wonder how you feel about this. There's a lot of independent newsletters being started up right now that you're seeing on social media, mostly by people my age. I'm 21, so there's people who are within my age range doing it. And on one hand, you admire the ingenuity, you admire the creativity to do that. I think it's good. But on the other hand, you take it with a grain of salt because the headline gives it away. Okay, I know this story is going to be a little bit slanted this way, therefore, let me not click on it because I know what I'm already going to get. And there's a thing I feel in news, both on television and in print, that's basically comfort zones. If you already tend to lean towards that, then of course you're going to read it because it's right up your alley. That's why these networks make the money that they do. And these newspapers, by extension, the large ones at least do as well. But I just wonder how that's shed because, you've talked a lot about the New York Times and your work. We look at where it is right now. To compare a New York Times copy, and I'm not saying this one way or the other. I don't really have a side and I don't have a dog in the fight, but a New York Times copy from 1996 to a New York Times copy now, a Washington Post copy from 2000 to a Washington Post copy now, a New York Post copy from same year, 2000 to a New York Post copy now. It's just, I wonder where the shift towards whatever side of the spectrum, I wonder where that happened. Well, probably 5 years ago, but I mean, the seeds had to have been planted before that, though.
I think it started happening around 2015. People started to latch on to causes or ideas that they felt were making them, were going to make for a better world. But oh gosh, this is such a longer topic, but instead of just building things the way that was going to be done, instead of adding to the conversation, the people's voices who you either didn't like or you didn't understand, we would get rid of them. And then our side will be made stronger. I actually was just reading an article in the New Yorker, which I tweeted about a very, very smart geneticist who, because she was saying, there can be certain genetic traits that will be indicative of where you might go. Well, that is considered by some people racist. And, being accused of racism is just something that can get you destroyed instantly. And I think people have learned, and we've got this incredible tool, the internet, for as wonderful as it is, and I love it. Even Twitter, I love. Um, it can, people can wield it to their own advantage, and they've learned how to make accusations that are, they don't have to have any truth. I mean, what's that phrase? You know, a lie travels around the world before the truth puts its shoes on. You know, you accuse, I remember when I was writing To the Bridge, the defense attorney for the woman who I was writing about, he had been a prosecutor in another part of Oregon, and he said he was always, and this was in, I think, in the 80s and 90s, he said he was always very, very, very careful about bringing charges of pedophilia, because he said once you ring that bell, you can't unring it. And unfortunately, sometimes people sling those accusations because they want their way in court, right? I mean, obviously these things happen. Child sex abuse happens, but you have to be very careful. Well, you can now accuse someone of, let's just use racism because we're talking about that. And you don't have to be able to back it up if you can get it to hit just right. And then this person has to, spend their days or weeks or years trying to undo this, or they don't. There are ways to parry this kind of stuff. But anyway, I think people are afraid of that. They're afraid that they're going to get caught in a bad spot, so they'd rather either say nothing or uh, or claim to be for the thing that is, the popular thing. So it's happened at a lot of our institutions. Now we see it maybe a little more on the left. We're used to maybe the Times or the Post. We thought it was a more balanced paper, but I'm sure it happens. It happens on the right too. There are people using these accusations on both sides. So let's not do that, people.
Yeah, yeah, and it's created kind of a social media war zone to where I said I'm on Twitter. Obviously, I put my work out there whenever I write a column on sports, or whenever obviously I do my podcast. I put it out there because I do want people to see what I'm doing. But if it wasn't for that, I've said many times, I just wouldn't be on it. I admire those who, although it can be a useful tool, largely don't do social media because I often tell them, I'm like, you're not missing much. You're really not. To where legitimately in the last year, I just, I spent most of it in hiding when it comes to that because I put out the work. I'm like, here's what it is. I even be careful with what I like. Here's my work.
Yep.
And then I'm gone.
I am too. I am too. Sometimes I'll like something because it makes sense. And I'm like, I'm not going to wade into this issue. It's not there are certain areas of expertise I will wade into. If we're talking about the sort of charming sociopath, or if we're talking about Antifa, I will, because I have this is one thing you said. So you have a lot of, 21-year-olds, let's say, starting newsletters. And I have, have a newsletter myself, and anybody can do whatever they want. They're going to get readers or they're not going to get readers. But the one thing that you have when you're a little older is you've seen this kind of stuff before. You can speak with some authority on, like, Antifa, let's say, if you've been covering it for 10 years, as opposed to like, I went to one protest and now I know everything. So anyway.
There you go. So one more thing before we get to the concluding segment. And like I said, I've had a great time talking with you. Paloma Media, I mentioned it earlier. It started up. It's gained a lot of ground pretty quickly. Interesting shows, interesting guests. What are the goals for it going forward?
Well, I'm glad you asked. It actually started as an idea. We were going to launch a media website. And then we wound up, it's kind of a big deal to build a website. And so we wound up just doing the stuff that was in our control super fast, which was podcasting, and built a podcasting studio in this other part of my apartment over here. And now, like, the Fifth Column guys podcast there too. And other people are doing their shows there. So we did that. And then what else? Oh, we started doing some videos. So we've got the YouTube channel. Now we're finally getting to the website, which should launch within about a month. I've been working on it with a designer in Israel, and it's going to be original material, and it's also going to be aggregated material. So people whose podcasts we love, we're going to be able to, run those too. So it's a little more one-stop shop than like, oh my God, all these like podcasts and Substacks. We're going to do a little bit of that, but we also have original material. We'll have columns. We've got a sports column called Balls. Thought that was kind of clever. And we're going to have, what I really want to have is I want to have some beauty and some delight, because I mean, if you watch, like if you go yesterday, Matt and I did, I mean, you will see what absolute goofballs we are on the YouTube. And the thing is like people like that. They want to like not only be, chew nails for breakfast. They want to get up in the morning and maybe I'm going to have like some sort of like little interesting tidbit for you and also like a really hard-hitting article. And also make it beautiful. I'm really into like I want it to be sensuous and luscious and fun. And I want to have like some video of some lady making a pie. And that lady will probably be me. Anyway, it'll be palomamedia.com. I mean, we've got a placement card up there right now, but that should be in about a month. What's the goal of it? The goal of it is because we want to do it. And I think that, I mean, people already are asking like, hey, what is this thing? Like you're asking, I'm like, I don't know, come check it out. Come be part of it. I had somebody last week say to me, hey, can I do like some social media for you just because I love you guys? And I'm like, yeah. So it's like, you create something that seems sort of like fun and interesting to people and they'll come and hopefully readers come too. So
there you go. If you ever want to run my podcast up there, I'm free 99. I won't charge a thing.
100%. You're on the roster. Like literally come to the party, right? We're just gonna throw people and we'll have it's gonna scroll all across the bottom. We're just gonna like have people's work that we like. Just throw it up there. Why not?
There you go.
Why not?
Appreciate it. And I hope it works out. So on that note, now we do get to the concluding segment of this show. It's been a great show called Rapid Fire. 5 hit and run questions from me and 5 answers from you. Are you ready?
Yep.
All right. So first, funniest interview you've ever done.
Oh man. I don't know. Oh my God, that's
you
terrible.
Can say pass.
Pass. I don't know. I have to think about that, but okay, pass.
All right. You've traveled a lot of different places. So, favorite place you've ever traveled to?
For work?
For work or for fun?
Okay, so for work, it was to Alaska, a place called Tok, Alaska, T-O-K. I went up there for a cover story for the LA Times Magazine. I went mushroom hunting. So mushrooms are wild. These wild mushrooms that we were hunting, you can only find, and there had been a big forest fire the year before, so they knew there was going to be mushrooms. This story was whack and so much fun. I really loved it. Favorite place? I don't know, New York or being with my kid, anywhere my kid is.
There you go. Not a bad answer. The third column or interview you're proudest of. And you can say multiple.
Okay, I will tell you a story I may have worked harder on than anything. I mean, obviously my book I worked really hard on.
Mm-hmm.
I a couple of months before my book was going to be published, I got an email saying, "Hi Nancy, my name is so and so. I am the daughter of Amanda Stott Smith that she gave up for adoption when I was a couple of days old. I found out that you are publishing a book about my mother, my birth mother, who she had never met. This is a woman who threw her kids off a bridge. I found it, and I was wondering if you can maybe put me in touch with her or with my siblings, one of whom was now dead." Okay.
Wow.
I don't think any writer has ever been in this position in the history of writing. You're getting a child of a woman who has killed and tried to kill your siblings coming to you in order to find out information. So I went and hung out with her in Arizona. She was 18. And I wrote a story that I actually wound up publishing on Medium. I just wanted to publish it. And I'm very pleased with how that story turned out. It was very hard to get right, and I worked very hard to get right. And I wish I could think of the name of it now, but I might think of it by the time we finish.
Fourth favorite bar or restaurant in New York City?
Well, I'm going to say a place down the street called Clandestino, which is on Canal Street down the street from where I lived. But had you asked me years ago, it would have been the Blue Mill Tavern, which is on the corner of Barrow and Commerce, where my dad grew up and where he was a bartender in the 1960s, including when I was born. And I learned to crawl there. And it was just a great New York City bar and restaurant. And I was in the city with my husband when Frank Sinatra died. And we went right down to the Blue Mill and had a drink and toasted him. So
Barrows is in Greenwich Village, right? If I'm correct.
Yeah, West Village, Barrow and Commerce, literally the most beautiful corner in New York City. Cherry Lane Theater is there. My dad grew up on that corner. I lived on that corner when I was little, and yeah, the Blue Mill. Yeah.
The reason I know that, not to make it somber, is because Morton and Barrows, also in Greenwich Village, is named after that intersection. Some friends of mine who work with them, they were there when it was renamed. It's renamed after a detective who was killed on 9/11, NYPD Detective Morton and Barrows. So if you ever go down there and you look up, you'll notice it's also named after him.
Okay.
So the fifth and final question, what advice would you give, and we've kind of talked about it, but we'll expand that here. What advice would you give anyone looking to enter your profession?
Don't pre-decide the story before you write it. You have to let the story tell you the story. You may have some ideas. You might think like, wow, I'm going to introduce Mike and it's really going to be like this. You have to the only way to be an honest journalist is to let the story tell itself to you. You also have to make the phone call or send the email that you're the most afraid to send, because that's how that goes, kids. Sorry. You have to turn in your work on time. Make your editors' lives easier. I actually wrote a number of years ago, I think it's also on Medium, called Advice to a Young Reporter or something like that. It's actually got a ton of hits, and it actually has some like little tips, just some like basic tips. And actually I have a right on my computer, 4 basic premises of writing: clarity, brevity, simplicity, and humanity. Or as this poet I once heard say, dazzle me with clarity. Be clear. Be clear. Trust that your reader is smarter than you are, and be clear. And just let the reader. We started this conversation by you saying you want to let the reader decide. Don't hand lead them to a conclusion. Let the reader decide. Give them the information. They're smart enough to do it.
Right. And that concludes what's been another really fun episode of the Mike Javen podcast. We've done over 100 shows now, going back to 2017. And I think the great thing about it is that, you reach out, you send those emails that you're afraid to send sometimes, but it works out great because I've been fortunate enough to chat with some really interesting people from all walks: law enforcement, the fire service, news, and sports, and Nancy was certainly no different. So thank you for being here. Before we go, if there's any shout outs or plugs you want to give, go ahead, fire away.
Yeah, go read my work on reason.com. There's a lot of interesting stuff about the Portland protests up there. If you want to buy my book, I would love it. It's called To the Bridge: A True Story of Motherhood and Murder. That is available on Amazon. And check in on palomamedia.com. You can go look at it right now. You're going to see our little goofy graphic we have up there. And we should be launching in about a month. And check out our YouTube channel. And thank you so much for asking me to come on your show. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you so much for being here on my end. If you're listening for the first time because you're here for Nancy, stick around. Love to have you. My YouTube channel is MC's Audio, MC''S Audio, where you can get, ironically enough, I call it MC's Audio, but this is where you can get the video version of the podcast.
Right.
So, of course, subscribe on that front. And as far as the audio version of the podcast, we're on Apple, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeart, anywhere that you get your shows, I should say, you're going to find this podcast. So on my end, of course, Twitter, Mike in New Haven, Instagram, original_MC1, LinkedIn, Mike Cologne, and then type in MIC''D, which is the first word of this podcast, Mike to New Haven, and you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Sports business line, 917-727-0891. Sports email, COLON on sports, Cologne on sports@gmail.com. Other business line for all other inquiries, 917-781-6189. And the Cologne report, THECOLON report @gmail.com. I don't have anybody confirmed for Tuesday's show, which by the time you're listening to this, of course, Tuesday will have passed. So hopefully I do find somebody. I'm working on it. But next week should be a couple of really interesting shows. September 20th, retired NYPD Inspector Anthony Raganella, who led the Disorder Control Unit for a number of years before he retired. And September 21st, his latest book is sitting on my bookshelf. It's called Inside Both Courts. Retired basketball coach and federal customs agent Bob Starkman will join me on the show. He's a good friend of the real Donnie Brasco, Joe Pistone. So in the meantime, on behalf of Nancy Rommelman, I am Mike Cologne, and we will see you next time. Take care, everyone.